The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, as a group of motorcycles rumbled down the deserted highway. The roar of their engines sliced through the evening stillness. There were 5 of them, all wearing leather jackets adorned with patches that spoke of their status, the Devil's Riders. The scent of gasoline and leather filled the air, and their presence was a loud declaration of dominance. In the lead, riding a black Harley-Davidson, was Johnny Viper Carter. His sharp eyes scanned the road ahead, his mind preoccupied with the plan that had been set in motion hours ago. The group was headed to a secluded public safety center just outside town, a place where the local cops occasionally hung out after hours. Tonight, however, the riders weren't interested in making friends. The plan was simple: intimidate, make a statement. They had been disrespecting authority for years, and this was just another chapter in their long-running saga of pushing boundaries. But what they didn't know was that they had just crossed paths with someone who would change everything. Inside the public safety center, things were quiet. The building, a small yet well-maintained facility, housed both police and emergency responders. It was a hub of routine activity, most of it mundane, dispatching ambulances, coordinating police patrols, and processing reports. At least, that's how it seemed. Staff Sergeant Michael "Mike" Anderson leaned back in his chair, reviewing reports on his tablet. He was used to the night shift. There was a rhythm to it, quiet, predictable. He'd served in the military for over a decade and had seen his fair share of dangerous situations. But this was different. Mike was not your average soldier. He had spent years in elite combat units, and even after his retirement from active duty, he still carried the discipline, sharpness, and strength that came from years of training. His wide shoulders and hard-set jawline gave him an intimidating presence, even when he was simply relaxing. But it wasn't just his physique that made him a force to be reckoned with, it was his mind. Every situation, no matter how dire, had a pattern, and he could read those patterns like no one else. Just as he was about to close his tablet, the sound of motorcycles revving grew louder, a cloud of dust rising as the riders approached the center. Mike's instincts kicked in. He sat up straight, locking eyes with his colleague, Officer Sarah Delgado, who was seated across from him. "They're not just passing through," Mike said, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "They're stopping." Sarah looked up from the desk, narrowing her eyes. "You sure?" Mike stood, his boots thudding softly against the floor. "Yeah. This isn't a coincidence." Outside, the Devil's Riders circled the public safety center like vultures, their engines vibrating the ground beneath them. Johnny Viper Carter dismounted from his Harley and gave a casual glance around the area. The building was unassuming, nothing more than a nondescript structure. Perfect for making a statement. "Let's have a little fun," Viper grinned, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who thought he could do anything and get away with it. He motioned for his gang to follow. The riders swaggered toward the entrance. They weren't afraid of a little confrontation. They were notorious for causing trouble wherever they went, and tonight would be no different. As they reached the front door, Mike and Sarah stood by, their eyes watching from the interior. Mike could feel the tension building, but he didn't show it. He had no intention of letting these punks make a scene on his watch. "Something tells me they're about to regret this," Mike muttered under his breath. He was a soldier, trained for far worse situations than this, but he wasn't about to let a group of bikers think they could intimidate people in his town. The door to the safety center swung open with a sharp creak as Johnny pushed it aside with his boot. "Evening, officers," he sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. The others behind him chuckled, the sound harsh and dissonant in the otherwise quiet room. Mike didn't flinch. He stood tall, his posture unwavering. His gaze moved from Johnny to the others, calculating their next move. "Is there a problem?" Mike's voice was steady, cold even. It was the voice of someone who had dealt with far more dangerous situations than this. Johnny smirked, stepping forward. Problem? Nah, we're just here to have a little fun. You know, remind everyone who runs this town. Sarah crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. This is a public safety center, not a playground. Viper's smirk faltered for just a second. He could tell there was something different about this man. Something that didn't sit right. But before he could respond, Mike took a step forward, his presence commanding. You might want to leave, Mike said, his tone no longer a question, but an order. Viper's eyes flickered, a hint of uncertainty creeping in. He had dealt with police before, but this was different. This man wasn't just a cop. There was something in the way he carried himself, something in the way he moved. Mike had that quiet intensity that made even the most reckless people second-guess their actions. Viper shrugged off the unease and took another step forward. Or what? You think you can stop us all by yourself? Mike didn't flinch. Instead, he took another step, closing the distance between them. His movements were fluid, practiced. I've handled worse than a bunch of cowards on bikes. The words hit Johnny like a slap, and he froze. There was something about Mike's calm demeanor that made him rethink his plan. The other riders looked to Johnny for guidance, but the unease was palpable. Mike stood tall, his military discipline evident in every movement. Now Mike continued, I'll ask you one last time. Leave, or I'll make you. Johnny, despite his bravado, realized this was no ordinary encounter. He didn't want to escalate things any further, but his pride was still on the line. He raised his hand, signaling his gang to stop, and took a step back. We'll leave, Johnny muttered, his voice less confident now. But don't think you've seen the last of us. Mike didn't move, his gaze steady. You're not as tough as you think. The riders slowly backed out of the door, their footsteps heavy with defeat. As they mounted their bikes and revved the engines, the sound filled the air once more. But this time, there was no victory in it. Just the hum of retreat. Mike watched them leave without a word. He could feel the tension dissipate, but he didn't allow himself to relax. His job wasn't over yet. It never was. But he knew one thing for certain. He had just reminded the Devil's Riders that not everyone could be intimidated. In the days that followed. The gang's reputation took a hit. Word spread about the night they had tried to mess with the wrong soldier. And for once, the bikers didn't have the last laugh. Mike's quiet strength had spoken louder than any roar of an engine. And as for Mike, he returned to his desk that night, his eyes scanning the reports again. The world was full of threats, but it was also full of moments like these. Moments where the right person stood between chaos and peace, ensuring that no one was beyond consequence. It was just another day for a soldier who never truly left the battlefield. The last ride. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the end of their arrogance. And for Mike Anderson, that was enough.